I was arguing with my dad when he smiled and asked, "So you really want your curfew to be extended?" I scoffed. "Yeah, no crap," I said, refusing to back down in front of my two younger siblings. "Then prove how much you want it." Before I could respond, he dragged a red chair to the front yard. "Sit down." Maya, 12, and Caleb, 8, watched from the doorway as I sat in the hot Texan sun with no sunscreen. Mom appeared with a water bottle. "No water until you apologize properly. Privileges require humility." After exactly 1 hour, sunburned and dizzy, I was allowed inside. "Tomorrow you can try again," Dad said with a smirk. The next evening, I rolled my eyes when he mentioned my 7 o'clock bedtime. "Dad, I thought you said it was 9. Why are you complaining?" Back to the chair. This time it's an hour and a half. My shoulders were already peeling from yesterday's burns, new blisters forming on top of old ones. "I don't even care about the stupid curfew anymore," I mumbled in between gulps of water. Dad and Mom exchanged looks. Frank was right. The chair really works. The next night after dinner, Maya forgot to wash dishes. 45 minutes in the reflection chair. When Caleb tried bringing her water, Dad stopped him. 15 minutes for you too, interfering with discipline. When we were all back inside, dehydrated and exhausted, Mom unveiled her notebook. "From now on, report your siblings' mistakes and earn rewards. 25 points per report, and 50 points lets you skip a punishment." The next morning, Maya saw Caleb leave his bed unmade. That afternoon, Mom announced a new rule. You can cut your chair time in half if you convince a sibling to take it instead. When Maya got an hour for forgetting her chores, she approached me. "Would you maybe take 30 minutes, please?" I pretended to be hesitant. "I guess, since you're younger." When Caleb got caught sneaking cookies, he didn't even have to ask. "I'll take the punishment," I volunteered. Mom beamed. Such a caring sister. Soon they barely tried convincing me. All it took was a sad look from Maya or Caleb, and I'd nod and take their punishment. Mom praised my sacrifice while documenting everything in her notebook. By week 2, I was taking 70% of all punishments, my siblings guiltily avoiding eye contact. Whenever we saw our neighbors, Mom told us we had to smile and wave. Otherwise, it was the chair for 10 extra minutes. Things escalated when Maya was keeled over in the chair, begging for forgiveness. "You can go inside now if Caleb takes your remaining 30. "Please, I'll take it instead," I begged. "Let Maya go. She's still a child." Dad shook his head. "Listen to your mother. She said it's either Caleb or Maya." I watched my baby brother's face crumble as he accepted her punishment. He came back with scabs littered across his back. "This is child abuse," I said, watching Dad apply the aloe vera we weren't allowed to touch. Natural consequences teach best. By the 3rd week, Maya fainted after an hour in 95-degree heat. "Stop being dramatic," Mom said, dragging her inside. Caleb returned from a 2-hour session with actual burns from the weather exceeding 100 degrees. I took photos with Mom's iPad until they caught me. My punishment? 2 hours. When Maya tried helping, they deactivated the air conditioning unit all night. I didn't even let myself cry because that meant more dehydration. The chair felt less like punishment and more like an excuse for my parents to watch us suffer. 3 days later, Dad caught me texting after lights out. "All 3 of you in the chairs. Someone needs to take responsibility for enabling this behavior." We sat in a row during a brutal Dallas heatwave. 1 hour passed. Caleb whimpered about his stomach hurting. 2 hours. Maya's nose started bleeding. Still waiting for that genuine apology, Mom called from the shaded porch. Mrs. Peterson emerged to water her garden. That's when I noticed she had her phone out, filming her garden tutorial. Perfect angle to catch us in the background. I bit my cheek hard, then started spitting the blood down my chin. "Oh my gosh!" I screamed. "Internal bleeding! Help!" It looked so much worse than it felt, with red splattering on the concrete dramatically. Mrs. Peterson dropped her watering can. "Call 911. My parents tried mouthing threats to me, but when they saw I wasn't backing down, they switched to the roles of worried parents. "My baby! Someone get help for my baby!" my dad shouted. My mom had crocodile tears streaming down her face. The hospital quickly identified my blood as nothing more than a mild cut, but our real conditions shocked them. All 3 of us dangerously dehydrated with heat injuries. My kidney function had started declining. Caleb's burns were infected, 2nd degree. Maya had lost 80% of her vision to heat damage. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom when the judge deemed my parents simply had poor judgment, not criminal abuse. That's when I knew what I had to do. I pushed through the courthouse doors into the parking lot where my parents were already at their car, Dad's hand on Mom's back as they walked like they'd just won the lottery. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I watched them, the judge's words bouncing around in my head about poor judgment instead of criminal abuse. Maya and Caleb stood next to me on the courthouse steps, both of them looking smaller than they should. Dad unlocked the car and looked back at us with this satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. We climbed into the back seat, Maya in the middle with her cloudy eyes staring straight ahead, while Caleb picked at the scabs on his arms until one started bleeding again. The whole ride home, Dad hummed some church song while Mom kept turning around to look at us through the rearview mirror with this fake concern on her face. Nobody said anything for 20 minutes until we pulled into our driveway and Dad turned off the engine. That night after dinner, they gathered us in the living room with these huge smiles, Mom holding a piece of paper she'd typed up. Dad announced that the chair was officially retired, but natural consequences would still apply for bad behavior. Mom read from her paper about our new family guidelines, her voice all sweet like she was reading us a bedtime story. They took our phones right there, Dad collecting them in a basket while talking about a digital detox to help us reconnect as a family. I watched them lock the phones in the hall closet along with the iPad and laptop. Everyone went to bed around 9, but I stayed awake listening to Dad snoring through the walls. I crept downstairs to the kitchen and found a pen in the junk drawer, then grabbed some printer paper from Dad's office. I wrote down everything I could remember, every date and temperature, every hour in the sun, the exact words the judge used. My hand cramped as I filled 3 pages front and back with tiny writing. I folded the papers small and went to my room, sliding them deep inside my old science textbook between chapters nobody ever reads. The next morning, I woke up early to use the bathroom and saw Mrs. Peterson through the window, already out watering her garden at 6:30. We left for school an hour later, and I made sure to look her way as we walked to the bus stop. She gave me this tiny nod, barely moving her head, but her eyes stayed on me until we turned the corner. I knew she understood this wasn't over, that the judge's ruling didn't mean we were giving up. Before breakfast, I'd gone into Maya's room and turned her face toward the bathroom light, checking how much worse the cloudiness had gotten overnight. The white film covered most of her left eye now and was spreading across the right. Caleb was in the bathroom putting toilet paper on his burns that were still leaking this clear yellow stuff that smelled bad. I memorized every detail since I couldn't take pictures anymore, storing it all in my head for later. On the bus, I sat in the back and stared out the window, my stomach churning as I made a decision that felt wrong but necessary. I'd keep being their shield, taking whatever came next. But this time I'd be smarter about keeping track of everything. Every punishment, every threat, every mark on our bodies would get documented somehow. I'd protect them until I could get us out for good, even if it meant more pain for me. During first period, I raised my hand and asked to see the counselor, telling my teacher I was having anxiety about family stuff. Cindy Ashcraft's office smelled like vanilla candles and had these motivational posters everywhere. I logged into my school email on her computer and showed her the photos I'd uploaded weeks ago before my parents found out. Her face went white looking at our injuries, Maya's eyes and Caleb's burns and my peeling shoulders. She grabbed a yellow legal pad and started writing down everything I told her about the chair and the hours and the temperatures. She had to file another report with CPS, she explained, because teachers and counselors were mandatory reporters. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a black and white composition notebook, telling me to write everything down and she'd keep it locked in her filing cabinet where my parents couldn't get it. I spent the rest of the period filling out the first 5 pages while she made phone calls in the hallway. When the final bell rang that afternoon, I took the bus home knowing something had changed. My parents were waiting in the living room when I walked in, both of them sitting on the couch with these forced, calm expressions. Mom asked about my day with way too much interest, wanting to know every detail about every class. Dad suggested we needed more quality time as a family, maybe some board games after dinner, or a puzzle we could all work on together. Their fake sweetness made my skin crawl, but I nodded and smiled because I knew the real fight was just starting. The doorbell rang around 7 that evening, and Mom's fake smile got even wider. Dad opened the door, and there stood this lady in a gray blazer holding a clipboard. "Jillian Rawlings from Child Protective Services," she said, showing her badge. My parents switched into perfect parent mode so fast it made me sick. Dad started talking about how concerned they were about our family dynamics, and how he'd already been researching counseling options. Mom rushed to the kitchen and came back with a plate of chocolate chip cookies she'd baked that afternoon. The smell filled the living room while Jillian wrote notes on her clipboard. She asked to speak with each of us separately, starting with me in my room. I sat on my bed while she pulled up my desk chair and asked about the hospital visit. I told her everything about the chair and the heat and the punishments, but she kept writing without looking shocked. She asked if I felt safe now, and I didn't know how to answer that. Next, she went to Maya's room, and I pressed my ear against the wall but could only hear mumbling. Maya's voice was so quiet I knew she was barely speaking above a whisper. After 20 minutes, Jillian moved to Caleb's room, and he said even less than Maya did. I heard Jillian asking the same question 3 times before getting any answer at all. They were both too scared of what would happen after she left, and I couldn't blame them. Before leaving, Jillian sat us all down in the living room and pulled out this official-looking form. She explained the safety plan that specifically said no outdoor punishment and required weekly check-ins. Mom and Dad nodded along like this was all very reasonable while signing the papers. Jillian left copies on the coffee table, but we all knew paper wouldn't stop anything once her car pulled away. 2 days passed, and my parents figured out their workaround. The chair was gone, but now Maya missed dinner for rolling her eyes. Caleb got sent to bed at 6 for not saying please fast enough. They were real careful not to leave any marks that CPS could photograph. I watched them test the boundaries of what counted as abuse versus strict parenting. That night, after everyone went to bed, I snuck outside with water bottles and granola bars from the pantry. I hid them under the loose boards on the porch where the wood had warped from rain. Back inside, I taught Maya and Caleb our new signal system by tapping on their bedroom walls. 3 taps meant danger, and 2 taps meant I was coming to help them. We practiced until they got it perfect. At the school the next day, I waited until lunch, then asked to use the office phone for an emergency. I called the legal aid number Cindy had given me and asked for Dan Fulton. He picked up after 5 rings, and I explained everything as fast as I could. He told me about burden of proof and how CPS needed medical evidence of ongoing harm for emergency removal. He said the chair injuries were old news now and we needed current documentation. I took notes on the back of my math homework while he explained the legal process. Later that week, Jillian requested our medical records from the hospital for her investigation. Maya had an eye appointment with the specialist, and I went along to help her navigate. The doctor's name was Piotr Ma, and he looked really worried examining her eyes. While Maya was getting drops, I asked him for copies of everything for our CPS case. He printed out the whole file showing clear patterns of heat injury and wrote extra notes about his concerns. He pulled me aside and said Maya's vision damage was permanent and getting worse from stress. My parents showed up at the school the next Monday saying they were worried about my emotional state. They marched into Cindy's office demanding I stop counseling sessions immediately. Cindy stayed completely calm and explained that removing me would require formal paperwork and district approval. Mom's face turned red, but she couldn't argue with the policy. Dad kept insisting I was manipulated, but Cindy just kept repeating the rules. They finally left after 40 minutes of arguing, and I could see Dad's hands shaking with anger. That evening, Maya came to my room crying that she didn't want to make things worse. Caleb sat in the corner and wouldn't even look at me when I tried to talk to him. I pulled them both close and said we were a team on a secret mission. I taught them our code word would be butterfly for when things got really bad. Maya practiced saying it, and Caleb nodded, but still wouldn't talk. The next morning at the school, I was putting my books in my locker when I saw this small silver recorder in the lost and found box. The secretary said it had been there for months and nobody claimed it. I asked Cindy if I could borrow it and she helped me put in new batteries. During my free period, I tested different spots in our hallway at home until I found the perfect place. The air vent had a gap where the recorder fit perfectly, and you couldn't see it from below. I practiced turning it on and off until I could do it silent and quick. The next morning, I crept downstairs early to grab breakfast before anyone else woke up. Dad was already in the kitchen making coffee and I heard him talking to Mom, who was still in their bedroom down the hall. The sun made them respectful. Maybe we need to find other ways to achieve that. His voice carried perfectly to where the recorder sat in the air vent, and I made sure to walk extra loud so they'd know I was coming. Mom came out adjusting her robe and they both went quiet when they saw me. I grabbed an apple and headed back upstairs, my heart pounding because the recorder was working exactly like I needed it to. Later that week, our internet suddenly stopped working, and Dad announced we were doing a family focus month with no screens. I tried to do homework on the computer, but nothing would load. Maya asked how she was supposed to turn in her science project, and Mom said she could write it by hand like they did in the old days. That night, I snuck out to the backyard with my phone and noticed I still had 1 bar of Wi-Fi signal near the fence. Mrs. Peterson's network popped up as guest available and didn't need a password. I crouched behind the shed and started uploading the audio files from the recorder to my school cloud storage. Each file took forever on the weak signal, but I stayed there for 2 hours making sure everything transferred. My legs were numb when I finally snuck back inside. The next day, Mom posted on Facebook about our family healing journey and how we were troubled teens who needed tough love. She tagged all her church friends and wrote this long thing about how hard it was being a parent to ungrateful children. The comments started flooding in with people saying they were praying for us and telling Mom she was so strong. One lady wrote that we needed more discipline, and Mom hearted that comment. Dad shared the post and added his own message about modern kids not respecting authority. I saw all this on the school library computer during lunch and wanted to throw up. Maya found me there and asked if I'd seen what Mom posted, and I told her to ignore it and focus on getting evidence. Cindy pulled me into her office on Monday and said she'd set up a conference call with the school nurse, Dan Fulton, and a CPS supervisor. She put it on speaker and I listened while they talked about building a team to help us. Dan explained that having multiple professionals involved made the case stronger because it showed a pattern of concern from different sources. The nurse said she'd been documenting every time we came in with injuries or health issues. The CPS supervisor asked Cindy to keep detailed notes about everything I reported. They scheduled another call for the following week to share updates. After the call, Cindy told me this was good progress even though it felt slow. That same afternoon, I went with Maya to her eye appointment with Piotr Ma. He spent a long time examining her eyes with different machines and lights. He pulled up her previous scans on the computer and showed us how the damage was spreading. He wrote in her file that the vision loss was directly related to the chair punishment, and that without that trauma, her eyes might have recovered. He printed out a detailed medical opinion about the permanent damage and said all 3 of us were at ongoing risk if we stayed in that environment. He gave me an extra copy of everything and said to make sure our caseworker saw it. When we got home that evening, Dad was moving furniture in the living room. He pushed the couch against one wall and told us to line up. Mom explained that since outdoor discipline wasn't allowed anymore, they'd found other methods that were still legal. Dad demonstrated a wall sit, lowering himself against the wall like he was sitting in an invisible chair. He said we'd hold that position for our punishment time instead of going outside. Mom added that cold showers would replace the heat exposure for teaching us consequences. My legs started shaking after just 30 seconds of the wall sit, but Dad made me hold it for 15 minutes. Caleb only lasted 5 minutes before he fell down crying. Maya made it to 10 minutes, but her legs gave out and she crashed to the floor. Mom stood there with her arms crossed, saying this was for our own good. The next morning, my thighs burned so bad I could barely walk down the stairs. During my next wall sit punishment for not finishing my chores fast enough, Mom stood next to me with the timer on her phone. "Privileges require suffering," she said to Dad, who was timing me with his watch to make sure Mom's timer was accurate. The recorder in the vent picked up every word while my muscles screamed and cramped. I focused on the fact that I was getting evidence even though my whole body wanted to collapse. 2 days later, we heard a car in the driveway and Dad looked out the window. Jillian was walking up to the front door without calling first. Mom rushed to hide the punishment chart on the refrigerator while Dad answered the door with a fake smile. Jillian said she was doing a routine check and needed to look around. She walked through the house taking notes and stopped in the front yard. She knelt down and ran her hand over the concrete where the chair used to sit. The sun had faded the red paint, but you could still see the outline. She took photos from different angles and used a tape measure to document the size. Mom and Dad stood on the porch watching her and trying to act casual, but I could see Dad's jaw clenching. Jillian asked them about the mark, and Mom said it was from an old garden project. The next day at the school, I waited until lunch to find Cindy. I had the USB drive with all the audio recordings hidden in my sock. We went to her office and she called Jillian to meet us there. My hands shook as I handed over the USB drive. I explained what was on it and how I'd been recording them without their knowledge. Jillian plugged it into her laptop and we listened to a few clips. Her face got more serious with each recording. She said this was exactly what they needed to show the pattern of psychological abuse. Cindy made a backup copy for the school records. When I got home that afternoon, something was different. Mom pointed to the dinner table instead of telling us to sit down. Dad gestured to the bathroom when Caleb needed to go. They weren't talking at all. This went on for 3 days straight. Not a single word from either parent. They only pointed and used hand signals. Maya kept trying to get them to say something by asking questions about homework and chores. She'd stand in front of Mom saying, "Please talk to me," over and over. Caleb brought Dad his favorite book and begged him to read it out loud like he used to. Dad just shook his head and pointed to Caleb's room. I wrote down everything in the notebook Cindy gave me. I documented the exact times they refused to speak, and how Maya cried herself to sleep each night. Caleb stopped eating on the second day, and just pushed his food around his plate. When Maya accidentally broke a glass, Mom just pointed to the broom and watched her clean it up in total silence. The silence was worse than yelling because at least with yelling we knew where we stood. Dan Fulton sat across from me at the legal aid office the next afternoon, spreading out papers on his desk while I tried to stop my hands from shaking. He explained that getting us out immediately meant proving we were in immediate danger, not just that our parents were mean. The patterns of getting worse over time could count though, especially with all the medical stuff. He helped me write down everything in legal language, focusing on how our bodies were breaking down and how Mom and Dad kept finding new ways to control us. That night after everyone went to sleep, I sat on my bedroom floor with a flashlight and wrote everything I could remember. Every single punishment, every threat they made, every time the thermometer hit a new high. My hand cramped up after the first hour, but I kept going. I wrote about the exact dates when Maya's eyes got worse and when Caleb's burns started getting infected. I organized everything by date and stapled the medical records I'd gotten from the nurse to each section. 3 days later during lunch, the school called me to the nurse's office. Maya was on the cot holding her head and crying. The nurse said she'd collapsed in math class with the worst migraine she'd ever seen. She checked Maya's vitals and found she was dehydrated even though Maya swore she'd been drinking water at home. The nurse wrote everything down and said this was becoming a pattern, that stress could cause dehydration even when kids had access to water. She gave me a copy of her notes before we went back to class. Jillian called a big meeting at CPS that Friday with all her supervisors. Cindy told me later they spent 3 hours going through our case. They were trying to decide if they should take us out right away or try to work with our parents first, through some intensive program. Cindy said Jillian fought hard for immediate removal, but her boss wanted to try family preservation services first. That weekend, Mom and Dad sat us down at the kitchen table with these papers they called family loyalty contracts. We had to sign them, promising to support family unity and respect parental authority no matter what. The papers had all these rules about not talking to outsiders about family business and always presenting a united front. Maya's hand shook so bad when she signed that her name was barely readable. Caleb could barely write his name at all. I signed mine clearly, even though it made me want to throw up. Later that afternoon, I saw Mrs. Peterson's old camera sitting on the fence post between our yards. She must have accidentally left it there while gardening. I grabbed it and took pictures of the contracts, making sure to get each signature clearly. Maya's shaky writing and Caleb's messy letters showed exactly how scared we were. I put the camera back on the fence and saw Mrs. Peterson grab it a few minutes later from her side. Monday morning, Cindy pulled me out of first period and took me to a private room at the school. She had recording equipment set up and said I needed to make a victim impact statement. At first, my voice was quiet and shaky, but as I talked about what this had done to Maya and Caleb, I got louder and stronger. I told them about Maya's eyes and Caleb's scars, and how I watched them get smaller and quieter every day. I talked for 45 minutes straight without stopping. 2 days later, we went back to see Piotr Ma for Maya's eye appointment. He did a bunch of tests and then sat us down with a serious face. He said Maya needed immediate intervention to save what vision she had left. The stress was making her eyes get worse faster than they should. He wrote in his report that she needed to be removed from whatever was causing the stress immediately. He used the word environmental triggers and recommended getting her somewhere calm and safe. That Friday night, Mom and Dad made a huge deal about family game night. They set up board games and made popcorn and acted like we were the perfect family. But while they were performing for whoever might be watching, I took pictures of the lock on the refrigerator with the combination only they knew. I got shots of the bathroom schedule taped to the wall that gave us each 5 minutes every 3 hours. The contrast between the happy family game night and the locks and schedules was so obvious it made me sick. At 11 that night, way past when we should have been sleeping for school the next day, Dad marched us all to the backyard for what he called reflection time. We had to stand in a line and think about our attitudes. Caleb was so tired he kept stumbling and almost falling over. What we didn't know was that Mrs. Peterson had installed a new doorbell camera that could see into our backyard. The timestamp showed it was a school night, and the footage clearly showed Caleb barely able to stand up straight from exhaustion. The next Monday, Jillian showed up at our house with printed screenshots from Mrs. Peterson's doorbell camera, and I watched Mom's face go white when she saw the timestamps showing us outside at 11 on a school night. Mrs. Peterson had already sent Jillian the whole video file, and signed a statement saying she'd give her any footage she needed because she was worried about us kids. Jillian added everything to this big folder she carried around that kept getting thicker every time she visited. 2 days later, I was doing homework when I heard Mom scream from the hallway, and my stomach dropped because I knew she'd found the recorder. She yanked it out of the vent where I'd hidden it and held it up like she'd found drugs or something while Dad stormed upstairs with a screwdriver. They took our bedroom doors off the hinges right there, just unscrewed them and carried them to the garage while we watched. Mom came back with these white baby monitors from the store and plugged one into each of our rooms, positioning them so they could see our beds. That night, I laid there staring at the red light on the monitor, knowing they were watching us sleep, and I started memorizing phone numbers over and over in my head. Dan Fulton's office was 2145-558-792. Cindy's cell was 469-555-3401, and Jillian's direct line was 97255568823. I repeated them like counting sheep until I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I wrote them in tiny letters on the inside of my shoe. At the school, I handed Cindy the last USB drive with recordings, and she locked it in her filing cabinet with all the other evidence we'd been collecting. Maya started having these terrible nightmares every single night where she was back in the chair, and when she woke up, she couldn't see anything at all. She'd shake and cry and crawl into my bed even though we both knew the monitors were recording us. I'd hold her and whisper that we were getting out soon, that help was coming, that this wouldn't last forever. 3 days later, Dan called the school, and Cindy pulled me out of class so I could talk to him on her office phone. He said he'd filed for an emergency hearing with full CPS support because of all the evidence showing things were getting worse, not better. The court date was set for next Tuesday, and I felt my hands start shaking with this weird mix of hope and fear. That weekend, my parents made us all sit in a circle on the living room floor for what they called prayer time, but it was really just them making us confess everything we'd done wrong that week. Dad went first, talking about how we'd betrayed the family by involving outsiders, and Mom cried about how we didn't appreciate their sacrifices. They made Maya apologize for having nightmares that woke everyone up, and Caleb had to say sorry for crying when they took the doors down. I had the school's backup recorder taped under my shirt, and it caught everything, including when Dad said families that don't stay unified go to hell. Monday afternoon, we were all at the school when CPS showed up at our house for a surprise inspection and found the thermostat set to 58 degrees, even though it was 95 degrees outside. They took pictures of everything, including the locked fridge with a padlock. Only my parents knew the combination too, and the bathroom schedule that said we could only use it for 5 minutes every 3 hours. Jillian told me later they also documented that all our bedroom doors were missing, and the baby monitors were recording us 24/7. That night, Caleb climbed into my bed crying because Dad had been telling him that kids who testify against their parents make God angry, and families that get separated never see each other again in heaven. I helped him practice saying simple things like yes and no, and telling the truth about what happened without using big words or getting confused. I told him that real love means protecting each other, and that telling the truth wasn't betraying anyone. The next morning, Jillian came to the house with another CPS worker and a uniformed police officer who stayed in the car but kept his door open. She told my parents that the department was strongly considering emergency removal based on escalating patterns of control and psychological harm. Dad's face turned this dark purple color, and he started yelling about government overreach and constitutional rights, while Mom made these comments about protecting her family from people who didn't understand their parenting choices. Jillian stayed calm, but I saw her hand move to her phone, and later found out she'd already warned the police to be on standby for the hearing because of Mom's threats. That night, Dan came to the school after hours and met me in Cindy's office where we went through my affidavit line by line, making sure every single date was right and every detail was accurate. We had 3 copies made, one filed with the court, one with CPS, and one locked in Cindy's safe at the school just in case something happened to the others. Dan explained that tomorrow would be hard, but all I had to do was tell the truth and let the evidence speak for itself. I went home knowing that in less than 12 hours, everything would change one way or another, and I couldn't sleep at all with the monitor's red light staring at me and my parents pacing downstairs. The morning came way too fast, and I dragged myself out of bed with maybe 2 hours of sleep total. Mom made breakfast like nothing was happening, but her hands shook pouring the orange juice. Dad kept checking his watch every 30 seconds. At the school, Cindy pulled me out of first period and took me to the conference room where Dan was already waiting with a woman I'd never met before. She introduced herself as Joan Underwood and explained she was our court-appointed special advocate who would speak for us kids. Dan spread out all my documentation on the table, and we went through every single detail for 2 hours straight. Joan took notes about everything, especially the medical stuff about Maya's vision and Caleb's burns. She kept asking me to be more specific about dates and times, which was hard, because some days just blurred together. Dan made me practice saying things without getting emotional or angry, because he said judges respond better to facts than feelings. Joan promised she'd make sure the judge understood what we'd really been through, and not just what looked good on paper. 2 days later, I put on my only nice dress, and we all got in Dad's car for the drive to the courthouse. Maya sat between Caleb and me in the back, her hands cold and sweaty in mine. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood panels everywhere and a flag in the corner. My parents sat at one table with their lawyer while Dan sat with us at another table across the aisle. The judge came in and everyone had to stand, which made my legs feel like jelly. Their lawyer went first and painted this picture of me as some manipulative teenager who just didn't want to follow reasonable rules. He said I'd exaggerated everything to avoid normal parental discipline and dragged my siblings into my rebellion. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white, but Dan had warned me this would happen. When it was my turn to speak, I stuck to exactly what Dan taught me, listing dates and times and temperatures from my notes. I showed the judge photos of Caleb's infected burns and Maya's medical records about her vision loss. I explained about the chair and the 100-degree heat and how we weren't allowed water. The judge looked at each piece of evidence carefully while I talked, his face not showing any emotion at all. Then Jillian took the stand and explained the pattern she'd documented of my parents adapting their abuse to avoid detection. She talked about the locked fridge and the bathroom schedule and the baby monitors recording us all night. She showed the doorbell footage from Mrs. Peterson of us being taken outside at 11 p.m. on a school night. Her professional opinion was that we were in immediate danger and needed to be removed from the home right away. Maya had to speak next, but they brought in special equipment to help with her vision problems. She could barely see the judge, but her voice was steady when she talked about being scared all the time. She said she never knew what would make Mom and Dad mad, and how the chair made her head hurt. So bad she thought she was dying. Caleb's statement got read by Joan because he was too scared to talk in front of everyone. His words were simple, but when Joan read about him taking Maya's punishment and getting burns on his back, several people in the gallery gasped. Joan explained how all three of us showed clear signs of systematic abuse and trauma that required immediate intervention. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that we were being dramatic, but the medical evidence was right there in black and white. The judge took a 20-minute recess to review everything, and those were the longest 20 minutes of my entire life. When he came back, he said the evidence clearly showed a pattern of escalating abuse and immediate danger to our safety. He ordered our immediate temporary removal from the home with supervised visitation only while our parents completed intensive therapy and parenting classes. The gavel came down with a bang that made me jump, and I felt Maya's hand squeeze mine so tight it hurt. Mom started crying for real this time, while Dad's face turned that purple color again, but they couldn't do anything about it. 2 days later, a CPS worker came to pick us up with our stuff already packed in garbage bags. The foster home was just a regular house in a different neighborhood, but it smelled like vanilla candles instead of that weird cleaning smell our house always had. The foster mom showed us to a room with 2 bunk beds and a regular bed, and there were no locks on any doors, including the fridge. That first night was weird because we kept waiting for someone to yell at us, but nobody did. Our first supervised visit happened a week later at the CPS office in this sterile room with toys for little kids. Dad tried his emotional manipulation right away, talking about how much he missed us and how the house felt empty. I kept my boundaries firm like Dan taught me and didn't engage with his guilt trips at all. Maya and Caleb sat close to me on the couch, drawing pictures with the crayons instead of talking to them. Mom kept trying to get them to look at her, but I told them it was okay to just draw if they wanted. The visit supervisor took notes the whole time and stopped Dad twice when he tried to blame us for breaking up the family. We started therapy the next week with someone who specialized in family trauma and actually knew what we'd been through. For the first time ever, we could talk about everything without someone saying we were lying or being dramatic. The therapist validated our experiences and said what happened to us wasn't normal or okay, no matter what our parents said. Cindy coordinated with our new school to make sure Maya got special accommodations for her vision problems, including large print books and sitting close to the board. Caleb got occupational therapy twice a week for the scarring on his back, which still hurt when he moved certain ways. It felt so weird having adults actually respond when we said we needed something instead of calling us ungrateful. Meanwhile, my parents started their court-ordered therapy and parenting classes, but Joan told us they were only doing the bare minimum required. They showed up to sessions but didn't participate much, and kept insisting they'd done nothing wrong. Joan monitored their compliance for the court, and documented every missed assignment and half-hearted attempt at the coursework. 3 weeks into therapy, I sat on the brown couch picking at a loose thread while the therapist waited for me to talk about the thing I'd been avoiding. My throat felt tight when I finally said it out loud that I should have done more to protect Maya and Caleb from the chair. The therapist leaned forward and asked if I thought a kid should have to sacrifice themselves to protect other kids. I stared at the floor and admitted that taking their punishments made me feel like I had some control over the situation. She wrote something in her notebook and explained that survival strategies aren't selfish when you're all being hurt by the same people. That afternoon, Jillian called our foster mom to schedule a meeting about the case status, and we all gathered in the living room the next day. She opened her folder and explained that CPS was pursuing founded neglect charges against our parents, based on the medical documentation and witness statements. The legal process would take months, and any chance of reunification would require our parents to complete intensive therapy and show real behavior change over time. Maya asked how long that would take, and Jillian said probably at least 6 months to a year if they actually did the work. 2 days later, we drove to the eye doctor where Maya got fitted for special glasses that magnified things for her damaged vision. She put them on and started crying because she could actually see our faces clearly for the first time in weeks. Caleb's appointment was next, and the doctor said his burns were finally healing right with the prescription cream and regular bandage changes. The scars would always be there, but the infection was completely gone, and the pain was getting better every day. Our foster mom took pictures of us at the appointments to document the medical progress for court. 6 weeks after placement, we all went back to the courthouse for the review hearing where the judge would decide if we stayed in foster care. My parents sat at their table wearing nice clothes and looking like concerned parents while their lawyer shuffled papers. The judge reviewed all the reports from Jillian, Joan, our therapists, and the medical team before asking if our parents had completed their requirements. Their lawyer said they were attending classes and therapy sessions, but the judge wanted specifics about what they'd learned. Dad gave some generic answer about communication, and Mom talked about stress management, but neither of them admitted doing anything wrong. The judge extended the temporary orders for another 3 months and scheduled the next hearing. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about how we'd need to be prepared for whatever happened next. I got out 3 empty binders from the school supplies our foster mom bought and started making safety plans for each of us. The first section had all our emergency contacts, including Jillian's direct line, Joan's cell, and the therapist's after-hours number. Next, I added copies of our medical records. the CPS case number, and instructions for what to do if our parents showed up somewhere. I wrote out the coping strategies we'd learned in therapy, like the breathing exercises and grounding techniques. Maya helped me organize the medication lists, and Caleb drew pictures of safe places he could imagine when he felt scared. 2 weeks later, we had another court date where Joan stood up and spoke for us as our advocate. She told the judge we needed to stay together in the same placement and get trauma-focused therapy that understood what we'd been through. She showed him our therapy progress reports and explained how being separated would hurt our recovery since we'd protected each other for so long. The judge agreed and ordered that we couldn't be split up unless absolutely necessary. Joan came to see us after court and said she'd keep fighting for what we needed at every hearing. Around that time, I met 2 other kids in our therapy group who were also in foster care. We started texting and made a group chat where we sent each other stupid memes about healing and dealing with court stuff. One girl sent a picture of a cat with bandages that said, "Me after therapy," and we all laughed because it was exactly how we felt. Caleb even asked to join and started sending his own drawings. Cindy texted me every few days to check how school was going and if we needed anything. Mrs. Peterson sent a card saying she was thinking of us. 6 months after that first horrible day in court when the judge called it poor judgment, everything was different but also somehow okay. Maya could see well enough with her special glasses to read her favorite books again, and even started drawing with Caleb. His back still hurt sometimes, but he smiled and laughed now instead of flinching whenever someone moved too fast. The burns had faded to pink scars that would always remind us what happened, but didn't hurt anymore. Our parents kept going to their classes, and our supervised visits stayed surface level with them, talking about the weather and asking about school. They never asked about our injuries or said sorry for what they did. But that was their choice, and we had our own choices now about focusing on getting better and staying safe together. Man, that was such a good time sharing this little journey with you all. Appreciate you letting me bring a bit of excitement into your day. Until we meet again, subscribe for more content like this.